Well, welcome. And thanks for participating in this new approach to our Proving Grounds Field Day. You know, it feels a little different talking to you through this camera. I really liked it when there was 500 to 600 of you here in this root pit with me underground. And we are from all over the country talking about ways that we could do a lot better job in raising corn. But at the same time, I realize there's new ways of communicating, and we can talk to a lot more of you by not asking you to drive 3, 6, or even more hours. And we think about, it's really important, how do we learn about different corn approach and production? And we need to use the new tools available to us in order to make our communication more effective too. You know, I think about how many field days you've been to this summer. In fact, how many more you have scheduled between now and the end of the month. And many times, you learn without question at these field days, but what's the experience at the event itself? Often you're sitting under a tent on a straw bale, or maybe you're next to corn, and you're looking at a lot of different posters with bar charts. And hey, I don't want to be too hard on that. We've done that in the past too. And last year, we put you on some really big trams. And yes, on the last day when it rained, we did get stuck. But at the same time, we could keep 150 of you really up close to a lot of live action. But today, through this video and the many that we're going to release here in the next week or so, we believe we can show you things that we haven't been able to do in a traditional field day. Now, believe me, I really miss not having you here on my farm this week. And I know a lot of you are going to miss that huge ribeye that Wiegand has been fixing and serving to us over the past several years. But we're coming to the Proving Grounds to learn. And I believe we can do a much better job of teaching you with this new online format. Now, the one thing that amazes me most about the business of farming is that ideas that today seem new, different, and radical soon become common practice. You know, you and I are driven to find new and better ways to farm. And that means we burn through new ideas pretty quickly. Example, just go back in the corner of your shed and you'll find a lot of attachments, or even out in the back boneyard, that were once the next new biggest thing, and now they're sitting out there in the junk pile themselves. So you and I, we try, we test, we adapt, and we do look for the next thing that's going to give us an edge in corn production. You know, things that we take for granted today, remember, were once the next big thing. For example, look at this successful farming article back from 1947. It explores the new possibilities of 2,4-D. Yes, there was a time when 2,4-D was the new breakthrough chemistry. And this article is teaching us how do we control many weeds which there was no practical control has ever been known. Of course, if you and I are old enough, we remember as kids what a hoe was, and we knew how to control some of those weeds that chemical wasn't getting. But we had to learn new techniques to use it properly. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, it's hard to think that a compound like 2,4-D was once cutting edge. It's also hard to believe that that chemical has lasted and still being used today, 70 years later. Think about all the products that have come and gone just over the last few years. You know, on my farm, a 3-year-old hybrid is soon to be outdated. And our go-to herbicide of Roundup is fading fast. And so it drives the need for new, different, and more effective. And it drives Tim and I at 360 and our engineering team to find new ways to implement new practices that you can put to work to become much better. So today, I'm going to show you 6 new ideas that are really different. And your first reaction might be, whoa, that's out there. But remember, 2,4-D was out there once too. And so is strip till, and wide drops, and downforce control on planters. At the end of the day, you and I have got to get really good at what we do. We're going to need to figure out how to raise 300 bushel if we're going to feed the 9 billion people in the world in the next decade or two. And we're not going to be able to do it with the same tools and the same technology that we're using today. So in 1947, when 2,4-D was first introduced, the national corn average was 38 bushels to the acre. So your and my willingness to test, learn, and yes, fail, and adapt will soon get us to a much higher national average. So I want to spend some time today sharing some of the things that I've learned from my own tests, my on-farm plots, and our own experiences through this growing season. And then I want to show you some really cool new products and concepts that I would think will solve some of the most costly problems that we face today. So get ready, let's get started. You know, this winter at our open house, we talked a lot and focused about our break even and our costs. For you and I to survive in the corn market we're in, and it's been painful in the last 40 days, hasn't it? Ever since the crop report. But the more you and I know our break evens, the better we get. And for our family farm, we really refocused. And we went in and there was nothing sacred. And we looked at every input and we said, what can we do? And that included starter and the way we put on nitrogen and our seeding. Fungicide was on the chopping block, and we were looking at every possible thing and saying, what are the next steps? Because if you and I know what it's going to take to get the kind of savings we can, our break even comes down. And the interesting thing is, we got really close. Remember, I told you this winter, when we get to our break even, I'm pulling the trigger. And we got within about 10 cents, and I pulled 60% of all of our corn and beans in one morning, and we let it fly. And we were ready the next day to go to 100% of what we thought we were going to raise, and it slipped away from us. But at the same time, we know we're going to have opportunities. And so those are things that happen. You know, we just got back from the state fair, and I love it because there's lots of things that we can learn from each other. And there was farmers coming up from every different angle and talking. Had an opportunity to talk to a young man, and his neighbor is taking this route, and he's going to go and retire. He's in his mid-50s. And the neighbor come to three young men in that neighborhood and said, look, I'm going to put my farm up for cash rent, and I'd like to have each of you give an opportunity to bid on it. So this young man is taking a look at that opportunity. Without knowing our break-evens, you're in a really dangerous spot. And as we work through what the bid should be, the most amazing thing to me was he is willing to lose money for 3 years for the opportunity to farm it. And the quote was this, Greg, if I don't, someone else will, and I'll never have a chance at that over 500 acres. And so we're in a pain situation, aren't we? And I think the hope would be for him that the market's going to rally. But it hurts me to think of a young farm family that's going to ride on the jagged edge of not making any money for 3 years. So this gentleman can have the time to play and do the things he wants. But that's the world we live in. And it's really coming down to this for me. What do we do for fun? And how do we make it fun? Now, I could sense the stress as I work with different growers, you know, throughout the summer. You can feel the stress in this area. And guys are saying if it isn't the markets, it's the stress of heat or not enough rain or too much rain. And so you and I have to get to that point. What do we do that brings us great satisfaction? I threw up back here on the screen behind me an opportunity that we had as a family to pick up a farm that's not really pretty. And it kind of drives my trigger to say, can we take farms and have an opportunity to get them and to fix them? And it's a great reward, not only just for me and my children, but for grandchildren. And so what are the things that we can do on poor farms that take them and make them? And the interesting thing, on this farm, we spent $4,900 less on the same day as the prime ground that went with these pieces. So we're dramatically under the money. Prime ground brought $14,100. We were so fortunate we were able to lock on for $9,200, and then we went to work. And we started to clear trees and some of the knobs that were, so we could start to take this farm into seed corn and put it into production. And I knew I had some money to work with that $4,900 difference. And so we spent about $100 an acre just in clearing. And then we come in and said we knew, besides just trees, we had a lot of areas that were really low, heavy ground that hasn't done well for years. And you can see all the different water retention it had. And this crops in this area has always been about 80 bushel behind. And so I put another $800 an acre in pattern tiling in a 60-foot pattern. And in areas we split it and went in 30s. And as you say, well, Greg, you got your own tiling team. I understand that, but at the same time, these are opportunities that you and I can do. And I'm just giving you the things that drive Greg's trigger. And then we come in, we said, but what about irrigation? Because this farm has sand knobs and really low, heavy ground. And I know if I can put water on it, I can now take it into seed corn production like you see here, and it gives us that extra advantage. So I put another $941 in irrigation. So we went with the variable rate nozzles. That's the pulsating nozzles. So now, as you look at the finished product here, it's in soybeans this year, so it can go into seed next year, and you see those areas that are a little bit lighter in beans, those nozzles are going to be running a little harder. And they're going to be putting on that sand ground, they're going to be putting more. And then on the low areas, we're going to put dramatically less. So VRI is really going to make a difference for us, and it'll really help. I like to look, though, at saying, what are the things that you and I can do now? And how can you and I control the things that we can do now? And it comes down to this. When you and I see this kind of a loss, and you say, well, Greg, what are we talking? 5 bushel? You know, I'm looking for 25 bushel. And I think it comes down to details that you and I do, and it's how we run our lives. And so at 360 a year ago, we introduced technology that said, let's grab each and every kernel that we can, because it's going to make a difference. So we introduced the 360 wide drop, something in corn heads that's all about cushion and capture. As you and I see these ears hitting the head, it drives me crazy to see all the loose kernels thinking those guys are not going to get in the tank. And so when you see these ears coming in and all the butts of the ears are intact and the kernels are there, it's a thumbs up for me. And then anything that does get loose, we capture it. But at the end of the day, this photo speaks volumes. And it's about saying these strips and look at the difference. So if we can put some easy money in our pockets, that's what I mean. And what can I do now? Those are things that count. Like I told you, we got back from the fair and I heard the extremes. In Illinois alone, we have extremely wet pockets with tremendous loss due to too much water. Yet today, guys are just struggling. To just 150 miles away, way too dry. You take over by Champaign, I heard it from dairymen and beef guys saying, Greg, we can't even raise hay, we're so dry. And so it's the year of the extremes. And so I put up 4 years here. We got 2012. All of us know what it was like in Central Illinois in 2012. Extreme drought. Then we had 2015. Hard to forget that, isn't it? Massive amounts of water. So we had these two scenarios in 17 happening in pockets all around the country. So wherever you're sitting tonight, I feel for you. And it might be you had the best corn ever like we did in 2016. Hats off to you. Thumbs up. I love it. And then let's talk about 2017, the spottiness and the year of the extremes. And I got it up here from the heat stress that we saw here in July, 95 degrees without rain. Right on the very field that I'm standing on here. The corn that you see around me went through tremendous stress to where we know there's pockets that are extremely wet. And that goes back to what we said. Can we buy farm that's marginal ground, then start to add the technology to bring it up to another whole level? So as we look at these 4 seasons, we realize that there's some factor and common denominator in all of that. And it's this little guy I talk about a lot, and it's the microbials bacteria. It's the things that happen where I'm standing underground that make a huge difference for you and I. And how this little guy runs sets the stage for either we're going to need more trucks or you can take a break because the combine's going to be working for a while to get that auger wagon full. And so how the microbials work in nature due to the season that you're having is something that you and I need to really understand, and it really needs to work with. Because look at these 4 different years. And we got the charts up here for you. So the low rainfall here throughout this year is 2012. Of course, we know where the green line is going. That's 2015. And you can see the massive amounts of rain for Central Illinois that we had and the stress that came with that. So we talk about Mike and microbials. And we talk about producing a lot of nitrogen out of your soil. Here in 15, that nitrogen was just washing away. And he was not very effective. We were losing mountains of nitrogen. And you and I had to come back in and we wrote checks, didn't we? And we spent more. 2012, Mike was gone. Ground was cracked. Ground was well over 100 degrees. Mike's not going to live in that environment. That ground slammed down, cracked open, drought, severe drought. There was no producing of any nitrogen in that environment. Then we take 16 here, and you can see how 16 went, and we remember the big yields that we had then. And then we look at 15 for our area. Started out really cold and wet, and now it's following almost what 16 was. And in here, Mike is cashing out. So as you and I think about what can we do now, what I'm really talking about right now, you and I need to think about our nitrogen systems for next year. We're now talking 18. Are you and I going to go out this fall, 10 months ahead of next year's harvest, and start to do a once and done of anhydrous, an aggressive nitrogen program? Or are we going to sit back and say, you know what? Let's work with nature, depending upon the year we have, and let's win. And let's give ourselves every chance to be as profitable as we can. And boy, does it make a difference. So let's talk about microbials and things that happen. We know that residue is Mike's food, and it can have a tremendous impact. This is a father-son team, and they picked this farm up, and it was in standing no-till corn stalks. It was scheduled to go into beans. They made a shift and decided to come in March and chisel plow that heavy residue in. And then on April 1st, they made an anhydrous pass and put all this year's anhydrous on, nitrogen, in one pass. And so I took the opportunity to watch this field. And as you can see here, things are happening. And this corn's talking to us. And the microbials have been very, very active. In other words, the residue that you see here, the massive amounts of residue, is being broken down this spring by all that bacteria. And in effect, they've used up a tremendous amount of nitrogen that's available to the corn plants. And you can see the symptoms here. There's some areas of pretty heavy green corn in this field, but this is the general location of this due to the fact that tillage was done, nitrogen was not thought through, and instead of feeding the corn, the microbials took it all. You go back into this field at this stage, just in the last week, and you can see the effects. You can see that this corn flat run out of N, and it's talking to us, isn't it? And you'll see this in one of the sessions that we were working with. We're talking about how do you and I position corn on corn for success? How do we feed corn? And how do we keep it always where corn doesn't have a bad day? And I told you that day, and you'll see it in the video, where there's going to be some 100-bushel swings. And when you take a look at the ears here, and you can see it, this corn checked out at 32,000. It checked out right at 101 bushel to the acre. If I go about 400 feet away in this field, where we didn't have these kind of symptoms, you can see some tremendous differences, and that corn's checking right over 200. So you and I have control, and there's things we got to think about, and we say, what are the next steps? So let's talk at 360. What are some of the things we would have done different? And when I think of a corn harvest product, and we think of what our chain roll would do, for example, it's all about saying, if we're going to position ourselves for success, let's do chaining of residue, and let's do sizing of residue. But right here, it says it the best. Can we be 2x faster? In other words, can we break this residue down from harvest to next spring in a rapid way? And we can let Mike and his team get in there and start to digest this down. And so we get the breakdown earlier. So we come in and we said, can corn heads be more than just harvesting corn? Can we start to use technology in the corn head to take and make residue become our friend and not a curse? And so when we talk about things we can do right now, this is things you put in your corn head for this fall, saying for next spring, I'm going to get myself in a position where I'm in control. Does it make a difference? Look at this residue here. that's on the screen. This residue is from the previous harvest. So over here in this tub, we have residue from 360 chain roll. We have residue from the John Deere intermeshing. And then we have residue from the John Deere opposed. And 6 months has gone by. So in other words, we went out in the bean field this summer and we collected this residue in no-till beans in between the 30-inch rows. And look at the difference and how fast. So we talk about twice as fast. What's a corn plant take to break down? Well, you have an 8 or 10-foot corn plant in your field at home. It takes 5 years. It takes 5 years for nature to get 100% of that value out of that corn plant. And my goal has been always from the beginning of our engineering team is that I want to take it in half that time or even faster. And it looks like some of the research we're doing, we're going to get that corn plant used up within 2 years, and all that pocket change comes back to us. So those are things that we're always working on, saying those are things we can do now. Of course, we know that you can come in and you can do tillage and you can roll that residue in. And you can see a picture here where we're working in a corn-on-corn field and we're doing tillage. And as we do that tillage, there's always a question. What are next year's roots going to be like? And what are they going to see? And what are some of the things that make a difference? All of us have dug behind rippers. And so what I'm about to show you is no surprise. And the OEM rippers, whether that's Deere or Case or Kraus, when you have a shank spacing at 24 inches and you have a narrower winger point, you're going to have those kind of mounds. As we fly over the top of this pit that we just did here in the last several weeks, look at the difference. And you can see it over here on this side where the bullet ran. Look how we fractured and we eliminated some of these heavy mounds. Let's talk a little bit about that. How does technology like that come to be? Well, we went out and we said, look, we need to lower the wing on the point, change the swept and the angle of it, and create a point that's going to fracture and blow up that density. You know, I told you here in July we are 95 degrees. You'll see it in one of the sessions that we have. Thermometer, so we're 95 outside temperature. The top of the surface of the soil in the 30-inch corn is 132 degrees. And we had cracks an inch wide, 7 inches deep. And so that ground was compacting and slowing. In other words, it was collapsing down. Ground collapses when we dry it out, and it gets really tight density. So if we can take a point like this, with this style of a wing, and we can come in and lift and fracture, all of a sudden we change the dynamics totally. And whether that's roots growing through it, whether that's water penetration both ways, in the spring, coming up, or going down. So when we talk about a virtual proving grounds, we're talking about where we went out in the spring before planting and we did perk tests with water and we showed how water moves through mounds, doesn't move through mounds, or where we fractured. And so those are things that we can take a look at. But you look at this point and you say, well, Greg, can I pull it? And I well realize we're doing 40% more work or almost twice as much work. And that becomes a real point. So we went out for you and we said, let's prove it out. So we put a load link in between the tractor. And so you can see us here. We're at a local dairy here, and we went into their wheat field. Now they've already come across here at their big dry spreaders. So there's a lot, this ground is slammed down due to the hot summer that we had. We've already had a manure application over the top of dry. And so now we're in here at this load link and we're saying, what's the draft difference in extremely hard conditions? How's a bullet pull compared to an OEM? In this case, we were using a Case Tiger Point, a 7-inch. So we got twice as much point. And so it was interesting. As we went in there in these extremes, we pulled 12% harder on the bullet. But yet when we come back to where you saw the AGCO tractor running, and we made 8 different passes the whole length of that field, there was 0% difference. The difference was the year before we'd used bullet on the corn-on-corn, and when we come back in the second year after bullet, we could see no difference between OEM point and the actual 360 bullet point. So lots of things for you to think about when we talk about what are some of the things you can do now. Remember the mounds that I showed you? We took our penetrometer that we designed and we came over those mounds. We said, what if we probed? So where you see the blue, that's obviously where the shank ran. So you can see here, we're on that 24-inch spacing. And then as the colors change, the point, it's a 3/4 inch point. It's coming down in 18 inches. As it's coming through, it starts to register more PSI. So if you go in and look out at the universities, Penn State, for example, did a great study. And Penn State says after 100 PSI change, roots start to struggle. And as roots start to struggle, let me show you what I mean. Quickly draw it here for you, and we'll show you what we mean. So as roots come through the soil, so we talk about having density changes. So we know that this soil is slammed down really, really tight density. And if we would have tight density, then we would have some really loose density where the shank went. And so if the root starts to grow here, there's our little seed. As the root starts to grow, and as it comes through, if it hits this tight density, it's going to struggle, and it's going to go around it. And so all the Penn State study was saying, if there is PSI over 100, it's going to have a hard time getting through. At 360, we say it this way. At 300 PSI, roots are going to turn. And we're able to show you that. So as that root grows down through the top 5 inches, because we know we did what? Up here in the top 5 inches, we got the disc blades that created and fractured the top 5. And then after that, that's where things start to turn, and you're going to see roots coming down. The only roots that are going to come into these mounds are the feeder roots. So it's going to take some time. That plant will adapt, and eventually, most times though, they grow right into the crack itself. Now let's take a look at where the bullet ran. And this is in the pit that you saw side by side, where you had 18 feet 6 inches of mounds. We had 18 feet of the bullet, and look at the dramatic difference. This is the environment that we're looking for, where roots just grow. And so those are things that are taking the next step. These are things we talk about, what we can do now. You can get yourself ready for the spring of 18. Let's focus a little more on nitrogen. And I guess as I think about nitrogen, I would put it into these 3 categories. V6, we know at V6, boot high corn. We're talking up the top of your boot. At boot high corn, that's when we're talking about rows around. And so you and I need to think about, how do we get enough nitrogen into corn early that it never has a bad day? Nitrogen can never have a bad day. So we talk about application with a planter, for example. Early on, you're fertilizing to get it through this stage of V6. In other words, where it's going to set how many rows around. Then we know that V10, I'm talking corn up to my shoulder. V10 corn, that's where nitrogen use really starts in the plant. 75% of its total needs for the year happen at that stage from then on, as it fills the ear itself. Of course, then we talk about tip fill all the time at the VT time. This is when that plant's saying, how long am I actually going to be? So these 3 things, whether it's V6, V10 shoulder high, or tassel, let's talk about, how do you and I know how much nitrogen to put on and when should we put it on? So here at the Proving Grounds, we decided to study it. And we said, look, let's take a plot and let's divide it in 2. Because we got an irrigation system, and what we could do is we could let the normal nature run, whatever the environment will be for 17, let's let that happen. Then we said, let's reenact the summer of 2015. So this side here is extremely wet. In other words, we're putting water on exactly like 15. Let's take a look at it and see exactly how it's going to work. You know, when we talk about nitrogen, we know a lot of us for years would go out before the planter and we'd broadcast in. And you could put variance amounts. There could be guys going out and putting on almost all their in. There's other areas where they might be putting on half, planning to come back with a side dress. So we said, well, let's start out in the plot, and let's start with that. Let's just put on a broadcast rate, and then let's compare it to where you and I, and there's a tremendous movement to this, where we put nitrogen on the planter itself. And we let the planter come through with nitrogen, and we're going to be banding on each side of the row. So when I talk about banding on each side of the row, take a look at this. So we're talking about where you would put a strip on each side of the row. So for our family, we're putting on 60 units, and we're putting 30 on each side, and we're banding it. And we've seen a tremendous advantage of that in the last year or so as we've been studying this and seeing it around the countryside. We realize that a 2x value, in other words, 2 times the value of N, when you and I come out and we put it beside each side of the row itself. And so in this case, for our farm, it'd be 30 units and 30 units for 60. And we'll talk about those things that happen. So we came into our plot and we did this. And interesting enough, as we watch it, take a look at what happened. So here is 30 units only. So 2 years in a row here at the Proving Grounds, I've struck out. Last year, I come in and put only 80 units of N on. And I told our team, I said, you just watch this. We're going to have yellow corn by the time it gets up the shoulder. And it didn't. What happened in 16? Mineralization took over early on, and that 80 units got it through the early stages. And once Mike and his team started providing free N, corn went through with no problem, and 80 units put on, and it made 200 bushel. So this year I said, I'm going to be smarter than that. I'm only going to put on 30 units only. And so all we did was put on 30 units of N the whole year, and we got that corn through into mineralization. And once Mike and his team by June 15 started, and that corn never had a bad day. And you look at these ears and say, well, Greg, I'm not too excited about that corn. I understand. It's not anything you and I are going to write home or send to the landlord. But at the same time, this corn's making 180 bushel on 30 units of total nitrogen for the year. And the reason it can do that is because we banded it, and then we got it to where Mike and his team started to give us nitrogen through mineralization, and off we went. And so I don't think you're going to see Greg going on his farm to a 30 total units of N, but you got to smile when you say 30 units raised 180. And the only reason it did, because where it was positioned. The corn could easily get its roots into it, and it carried us a long ways. So let's talk about nitrogen on the planter. And like I told you, there's been a great movement to it, and it's probably one of the hottest things going in Central Illinois. You'll hear a lot of talk about it. I got a friend for 35 years, wouldn't think of putting liquid of any sort on his planter. And last year, for the first time, he had nitrogen on the planter, and he's banding it beside the row. And so we realize in the crowd tonight, wherever you're sitting, there's some of you are way ahead. You're already doing it. There's some that are thinking about it, and there's some that are sitting back, and they're saying there's not a chance that I'm going to mess with it. So let's talk about what are some of the reasons not. And so as we look here, you can see we've come out of the field and we've done what? We've come in for a refill. And that's probably the number one reason you hear, Greg, I don't have the time it takes to put nitrogen on my planter. We know that it takes almost 12 minutes sometimes to come in and reload. So you drive across the headlands and you come in. The other thing is, where do I carry it? Out in the marketplace, there's all kinds of different areas, and a lot of guys went to more. And you can see the saddle tanks here. The biggest concern I have is not only for the weight in the tractor, but the concern I have is for the width. It gets extremely wide. And so you'll also see guys with lesser amount, but they'll carry it out front. Pretty popular in the area, pretty easy to do, and they put the elliptical out front. But then we start to think about this, and we say, well, if we're going to put this kind of weight out front, and this is a 400-gallon tank, if we're going to lever that out front, what's happening to the balance of the tractor and the way it was designed? Well, let me show you. So the 400-gallon of fertilizer weighs about 4,400 pounds. And then you put that out front, but then things start to happen for the tractor itself. You can see when we put that out front, it lost, and we have digital scales on these tractors, it lost 3,500 pounds on the rear axle. So all of a sudden now we're having a traction problem and slippage problem. And besides just the weight of the fertilizer, we transferred another 3,426 pounds to the front tires themselves. And you and I often talk about the center of the planter and about the pinch rows. This tractor has duals on it, And so there's a 30-inch row right in between these front tires. And all of a sudden, you and I are back in the paradigm. We're saying our root's happy. Our corn having a good day or a bad day. So at 360, we said, look, we know there's a storage issue. Where do we put it on the equipment? And how do we look at it? So we just said, let's rethink this. Let's jump in and let's offer a solution. And so at 360, we decided to design some streamlined tanks. Tanks, they're going to carry 700 gallon, 350 on each side, but they're designed on the tractor in a way that gives it balance. In other words, it's positioned so you have good sign of light. It stays within the width of the duals themselves. So the tanks are narrower than the outside and the front duals. So you have no problem on the road itself, because you and I get our heart pumping quite a bit when we start moving big equipment. So let's take a look at it. And let's take a look at exactly how it's going to transfer out. So the 700 gallon is 7,742 pounds. But when it comes to the weight transfer, this is where the difference is. The way we're balanced, we took less than 1,000 pounds off the rear axle, and we only added on the front 658 compared to the 3426. So almost double the gallons, but we were able to redistribute the weight in quite a different fashion. And so these are things that we're thinking ahead, saying, we know we're going to need nitrogen on planters if we're going to win in a 325 corn market. You cannot beat the efficiency, but how do you and I do it in a way that it makes it good for the whole team as we plant corn? Let's talk about a corn plant and its root system. And so you can see a root system here, and you can see the roots over here in the actual live trench. And as you and I look at this amazing part of it, you know, as we think about it, this is the basics of the whole, everything underground. It's amazing when you think, if you weigh the top of a corn plant and then you could weigh the root system, they're equal in weight. That's amazing, isn't it? 3,000 miles of active root growing underneath each corn plant. And so as you and I go out in the field and we talk about it, how does it work? And what's happening out there itself? Let's take a look. So let's just draw how a corn plant functions. And we know, as we're talking now, nitrogen, and you can see it up here on the screen, we know that we can put on a massive root system. So where's the sweet spot in this? So at 360, and you could probably imagine that Greg would have an opinion of where he'd like it, because I've used it for years, and I've watched this, and I'm going to say for over 4 years that we've been putting nitrogen bandit beside the seed itself. We know what? We know that the crown of that corn plant is going to be 3/4 of an inch underground. And we know that this little seedling root is going to help keep this plant going for quite some time. And then the crown itself is going to start to put out its 1s and 2s. So we believe the nitrogen needs to go out to the side. And so I'd like to see it out there about 2.5 inches away from the side of the seed, because we got, what, 32%? So we're talking about 32% nitrogen here. We know there's going to be a sodium level in that. But the sweet spot for us at 360 is we're talking about jumping in and saying we believe nitrogen needs to go in the planter. We'd like to see it be about 3/4 of an inch below ground. Get it below ground, but not to go down to the 2-inch where the marketplace is now. I like the fact that we're going to be off to the side, and then we're going to work with nature. And we're going to let Mother Nature take it down for us, because we know nitrogen moves with water. And so as the water comes and starts to come in here, it actually creates almost like a water balloon. And as its 1s and 2s are coming through, we now have nature helping us with dilution. That's going to be diluted, the salt, and it's going to create what I call the optimum place to put nitrogen. And so for us, we're going to be looking at this year going to 80 pounds an acre. So I'm going to have 40 on each side, and I'm going to put it in the sweet spot where I know my 1s and 2s are going to quickly get to it. So I'm excited to say one of the new things that we're going to talk about is a nitrogen attachment that goes right on your planter that's going to create that kind of an environment. let's break it apart and talk about where's it at and why do we have it where we have it. You know, we're on the closing system. I worked on planters all my life, and I'm not a big fan. We start putting, you know, disc and attachments on the actual shank itself that's holding the disc opener. It's pretty sacred for me that the seed stays the exact same depth. I can show you in fields this year, extremely poor pollination due to the fact of late emergers. Not only just in depth, but in some cases, remember the April 21st massacre weekend, this April? We did what? And that 22nd and 23rd, we got down to less than 40-degree soils. I started quite a firestorm on social. I said, we're parking, and we did. We parked our 3 planters, and we rode it out. And we were worried about what? We were worried about erratic emergence, because when it come time for us to have pollination, this is a year, the worst in 10 that I've seen for pollination. We got a lot of tips. We got a lot of insect feeding. We had a lot of issues getting corn pollinated. So I like it being off the shank. I told our team, let's go on the closing system. But let's not go so deep with this. This is an 8-inch wheel here, running the same angle as a closing wheel. And you can see that it's got the ability to run right with it. And we know if you need just a touch more tension, it's not a problem to go to notch 2 on that. But we have the ability now to tuck in and going 3/4 to an inch deep. We don't create any problem for closing. And we for sure don't create any kind of problems for emergence and seeding depth. The sweet spot of this is what? We have the ability to position nitrogen right behind that disc, and we're the 2.5 apart. In other words, we have the ability to be 5 inches apart, and we have a small hydraulic hose that's braided steel in it, and we've got a lot of experience dragging hoses with wide drop. And this hose has tension on it, and it's going to deposit that liquid right underneath. Take a look here, and you can see it. The seed's here. The nitrogen is here. You can see that it's 5 inches apart. You can see it's here and here. And then you can see that it's only about 3/4 under the ground. So as water starts to create and nitrogen starts to get into the water system, it's going to dilute and come down. The crown's going to be here. And that crown root 1 and 2 are going to go right through that feeding zone. And we're going to have some pretty exciting results in a very, very short time. So the 360 nitrogen attachment is all about simplicity and accuracy. And I believe we're going to put it at a cost that's going to get a lot of attention. What about besides nitrogen, though? How about starter? You look at these little guys in the V2, V3 range. And these little guys are talking to us, aren't they? And we realize that now in starter, we're not talking nitro anymore. We're talking like 1034O or 722.5. But we're really talking about phosphates. And where do you and I get the P into this plant early? There's been tremendous amount of studies done. And starter can drive yields dramatically. And when you and I start seeing 12, 15 bushel due to starter performance, that gets our attention. And that makes a big deal. When you go back to our pie charts, and we talk about cost of production, that's real. And so how does P work and where do we put it? We know what? We know that your soils, if they're below 65 degrees, the phosphates are locked up. And it's locked on that soil, and that plant can't readily feed on it. And so we need to position starter really close to it. In this case, we're what, at 53? 53 degree soils? We know that this plant's looking, and it's got some brand new seedling roots out that's looking for starter. So when we talk about 360 entering in to starter, nitrogen, and starter attachments, we believe that you and I need to have control. So let me draw it out for you. When we talk about this seedling root, we realize that starter is going to run you out. Let's just talk about 1034O. So 1034O is going to run you about $3 per inch in the row itself. So if you and I, and we're out there between plants, if we're 6 inches, let me just get a new sheet here, and we'll draw it out for you. So we have plants here that are going to be 6 inches apart. And we know that the most effective place for corn roots is a 3-inch diameter. So in other words, for us to get the most dollars out of our system, it's going to be within that 3 inches of the corn plant, which means we have a 3-inch, kind of like a no man's land in between plants. And so as we came into this, thinking this through, we said, you know what? We need to give the grower total control. If it's really $3 per inch, and we know it's costing anywhere for starter alone, $18 to $20 an acre, what if we could design a system where we could put 50% savings? And this is big. So if we could get the same or more yield, and we could take this $18 to $9 an acre and still push yields that 12 bushel plus, this gets my motor running pretty hard. And so you can see here where if we can give you control where to put that, let's take a look. So at 360, we designed a new starter system called the dash valve. And what I'm talking about is where you and I would go out and we would put a dash right over that seed. In other words, we have that 3 inches. And so now we've taken and we've cut our costs tremendously. No longer are we out here in the middle, but we're out here where you have it right around the seed itself. So dash gives you control. It gives you the ability to tell me where you want it. And so let's take a look at it on the planter itself. So what you see here is a unit that's in furrow. You can see it's mounted here to the back of the row unit itself, and it's running up in the air right in front of the seed tube. And you can see that right here we have a valve, and that so the dash is inside here. Also inside here is a flow meter. So we have a flow meter and the dash valve inside this housing. We have a sensor that's going to be a smart sensor that's riding right at the end of the seed tube, outside of the seed tube, and we have a seed firmer that's running in there. Let's start to break it down a little bit and get a little more detail. Here's the bottom, so you can see the firmer's mounted into that bracket. You can see the smart sensor, and it's reading the seed as it comes out of the seed tube. The research we've done this summer is we've looked at taking a hard look at the middle of the seed tube sensor. We found that 68% of the time, the seed was as much as 1.5 inches or more away from where the sensor said it would be. If you and I are going to start to say we want total control, then we have to know where the seed is. And once we know where the seed is, we start to come down and say, now we can put the right amount and the right product in the right place. And it's more than just in the trench. This is shows it in the trench. Here's a good example of it where it's actually outside. And so it's, as you look at it here, it's going to run for you. So you can see, we're going to slow it down. You can see the pulsating. So you can see the dash putting out its dashes, and you're going to see seeds. So right here, you're going to see a seed come by. I got to back up a little bit. There goes a seed. You got a seed right here. So when the seed tube, seed exits the seed tube, the dash is going to respond. The beautiful thing, you're watching it through a huck step shoe. So the dash valve from 360 has the ability to do technology in anybody's nitrogen starter attachment. So if you're in a huck step shoe, let's think about that. Let's look at it from the top. So if we are going to be in another starter attachment off to the side, let's say you're a grower and you say, you know what? Here's your seeds, and they're lined up in a line. And so if we had the huck step shoe in here, now we can put our dash beside. In that case, it would be 3/4 of an inch side of the seed. If we had a Gen 2 or yet or step between, we could put it out over here at 2 inches. But now you can position. Do you want your starter in between? Do you want it lined up parallel? So we're going to give you total control. And it's designed so that it runs with your existing equipment. And so on the dash, if you have a 2020 and an SRM, you'll be able to plug our dash right into the SRM. And up on your 2020, our flow meter will give you the exact rate that you're running. You'll be able to print it out on your field view map. And so the different platforms are out there, whether that's the 2630 or the 2020 from Precision, we're going to be able to use what you already have. You're going to see that theme all day long. I like to make it as affordable as I possibly can for you and utilize equipment that you already own. So you're going to be able to go out to the side, or you can go right around the seed itself. Or if you're someone that says, my product, I don't feel seed safe, you can go ahead and you can put it in here as close as you'd want to the seed itself. Let's take a look at the combination of the two units. So you can see here, you got the dash valve mounted right up in here between the gauge wheels. You got your smart sensor reading. You got your flow meter telling you exactly the rate. You can see the seed firmer here in the trench. And then as you come back, makes a lot of sense to me, you got your nitrogen. And you know exactly where your rows are. And now you're applying and you're getting out of the gate. And you're making sure your corn never has a bad day. And you're getting yourself into a spot where things are really going to start to work. We know for years, we talk about V6. We know that you've side dressed. And you can see, side dress bars are going to do what? They're going to position nitrogen right between the rows. And we talk about it all the time and we say, nitrogen doesn't move. Nitrogen stays where you place it. It moves in a vertical plane. It doesn't move out. Like you pour water in a bathtub or a swimming pool, it's going to cover the bottom of the pool. Not nitrogen. When you're side dressing for colder, it's going to stay in that vertical band. And you can see it here where we have drip tape. In other words, drip tape like you see right here on this farm. So every 40 inches, we have drip tape. And when we put nitrogen through it, if we have a grass crop over the top, you can see exactly the whole year. The green bands stay, and it never spreads out and takes that ryegrass there and makes it green. And so those are things that you and I need to understand. So we believe pretty passionately that you can take a Y drop and you can put it on to early young corn in a V6 stage and position in right over the top of the plant. That's going to make a tremendous difference for you. And so here, watch it run. So as you see it come here across the top, you can see if our hose is dragging right beside the plant, we're now positioning in what we call right in the area where it can do you the most good. And I'm going to show you some studies that are really interesting because we're putting this water, what we call in stem water. And you and I know that even a light dew can make quite a difference. Now, I get asked the question all the time by many growers, say, Greg, how much rain does it really take to make and create this kind of a dark spot? And it's not very much. This here was way less than 1/10 of an inch. And so we did a study and we went out and we said, look, let's capture. And you can see by going to Menards, our engineering team, we designed the ability to capture all the water that comes down that corn plant, down that stalk, and it's caught in these containers. And you can see all the different stalks that we were catching. Out here in the center of the row, we have another container. And so we took our irrigation system here at Proving Grounds and we come across this with a 1/2 inch of rain. And then we took and we captured one plant in the center, this container in the center of the row, and one plant itself. And look at the difference. 8x. We captured 32 ounces or more around that plant. In other words, the way God created that corn, those leaves funneled all that water down that stem. It came down that stalk. We had 32 ounces compared to 4 ounces in the center of the row with a 1/2 inch of rain coming over the top. So this is why I'm so comfortable about putting nitrogen on top in either young corn, V10 corn, or VT corn. Let's take a look though. We know this is an extremely popular way. So now we're in V6 corn. Let's start in V6 in our nitrogen study. And we tried lots of different styles. So we tried colder, we tried urea, we tried Y drop. In this case, we have a grower come in that has a urea spreader. It's a brand new system this year. He's spraying a 60-foot pattern over the top of this V6 corn. And you can see the urea pellets right down the whorl itself. And when you see that, you and I'd have to say, boy, is that going to create some type of burn? And you can see it here on the leaf edges. And as we take the drone and fly it over the field, you can pick it up over on the dry side of half of the plot. You can pick it up. It's much more severe than where we're watering. You can see we're watering today. Remember, this half of the plot is 2015, and it's getting a lot of water because we had a mountain amount of water through that whole season. So let's look at V6 corn, and let's look at the plot results and see what the difference was. So in this plot, we had a 70 pounds put on over the top. We had 30 pounds put on at the planter. Remember, the 2x2. And so we're shooting for 200 pounds of nitrogen across this whole plot and these 9 or 10 different blocks. As we looked at the colder, they were all done on the same day, and this is all done at V7. We come through at the colder, and well, these are where we went in, if our agronomists, and we pulled out all the kernel checks. These are not harvested yet. This is where we come in, and we took all the stand counts, kernel counts, and weighed these ears. We ended up with 206. Where the urea was in that 60-foot pass, we ended up with 210. And then we came in at 100 pounds at V7, and it went 231. And so we had a 25 bushel gain. And you look, that's on the dry side. Over on the wet side, where we have the water of 2015, 194, 198, and look at the difference. There's 12 bushel difference. What happened here? Well, we had a lot of water come down at that V6 stage, and that nitrogen flat out moved. Just like it did in 2016, that nitrogen get away, where at the Y drop, where we had a position on top, right next to the stalk, we saw quite an advantage, as much as 27 bushel. And so these are things that are starting to really show up as we repeat year after year. And we know that in V10 corn, there is a tremendous cost. So if you and I are in our fields and we're walking in shoulder high corn that's getting ready to put on an ear and soon to tassel, and we see these kind of deficiencies, there's going to be a cost. And that cost comes in tips. And as you look at the tips and you see this, my heart starts to get pretty tight, and I can feel my chest tightening, because I realize every kernel that we blew off due to nitrogen, in this case, this field, due to nitrogen loss, is 6 bushel per kernel. So if there's 10 kernels missing here, that's 60 bushel that we're missing. So let's go back to our plot. And so you can see here we're in V10 corn, and we're in here, we're applying with the Y drop, and you can see the deer applicator, sprayer going across. We got the Y drops at the bottom, and we're bringing all these strips up to 200 pounds of N. And so you can see it as it runs across, as it's running right down in there, and it's got its hoses running right beside it. So let's take a look at this plot and see. Remember, we're shooting for 200 pounds of nitrogen. And so as we take a look at it, in this case, the 200 pounds of just nitrogen only is 210. That's interesting when you think about it. So over on the end of this plot, I told you it made 180 with just this 30 pounds. That 170 pounds broadcast in there with a floater only raised that maybe 30 bushel. What is that really telling us? We're telling us that that bandit early was almost equal to what that broadcast was. Then as we come down, we got the colder in here at V7. You got your urea at V7. You have your Y drop at V7 at 100 pounds. Then we come in late, and we put it on at V15 at 224. And then we come in and we put 60 pounds on at V6. This is a 2-pass Y drop, and 40 pounds at V15. And we went up to 237. And you look at those differences, you say, well, wait a minute, what happened there? Which one really helped you? It was the early, wasn't it? Early really made a difference, and you can see that over here likewise. So over here on the wet side, 194, 194, 198 with the urea. We jumped up to 222, 234 here in the V15, and the 60 pounds at V7 and the 40 pounds at V15 are 226. So here on the wet side, the late application, the later we applied it, the more that it made us due to all the rainfall that's coming through. So we'll take these plots to harvest, and we'll be sharing them with you all on the 360 channel as we go through and we take a look at it. Other things, I told you we have 6 new products. We know as you Y drop, and especially in tall vegetation, and you run all day in tall corn, it gets a little hairy as you and I are looking out across the top of the sprayer here and knowing where to drive. And so at 360, we're introducing 2 new concepts, 2 new products. One's going to be the 360 steering solution, and it's pretty unique. We're going to have the tactile wands You've seen them a lot underneath your corn head. And you can see we're mounted right here on the right-hand front tire. And we have a bracket that's mounted it. And so now the wand's going to be able to tell the sprayer exactly where it is. But we're going to utilize equipment you already own, because a lot of you already have, the GPS technology either in your tractor or in your sprayer. And so we just run our control cable right up to the top where the globe is. And as the globe's receiving the GPS point, our tactile system is just correcting it. So if that sprayer needs to go 7 inches to the right to be in the center of the road due to the wands, we're going to intercept that reading of the GPS points and we'll change it at a very, very low cost. This is a pretty exciting technology. Over here, you can see we've added boom height control. So when you're in tall corn, we know your sonar boom height sensors do not read through 8-foot, 9-foot high corn. And so it's always a challenge to say, where's my Y drop down in there? I'm 10 feet corn. Where's my Y drop? Is it still 12 inches off the ground? And so you can see at 360, we have a wand in here that's going to run on the ground, and it's going to keep that 12 inches for you. And you can see us here running through with both of these running. So you can see the tactiles is keeping that sprayer right in the center. And as it's running through, it's just seeking it and it's taking it. It's hands off here. Sprayer's guiding itself, and you're running through corn, you know exactly where you're at. As we come out and look at the booms themselves, you can see the booms are moving. So we have a left boom, center boom, and a right boom sensor on your sprayer that you already own. We just take our wand, and we come right up the Y drop, and we plug it right into your sensor, and you're off to the races. And you can let it run on its own. So simple technology that can make quite a difference for you. As we're coming here to the close, you and I over the years have figured out the efficiency of a grain cart. You can see our operation running here. And as we're loading, it didn't take us long over the years to figure out that a combine can do 40, 50% more harvest if it never stops. And so as I looked at this and thought this through, I challenged our team and I said, guys, why in the world are we stopping planters? What if, just like the grain goes away from the combine, if we could design technology where the planter never stopped, and we could figure out a way to bring liquid to the planter, and so that the planter is always at 100% peak efficiency. And so we're excited to introduce to you a concept called 360 Sprint. And the Sprint system is where you take something you already own, as simple as a gator, and you come out and you give enough liquid. When you pull in, you unhook your gator, you take just enough liquid, a minute or two, to get you started. The gator can fill in less than 3 minutes, 300 gallon, and you're going to come up and you're going to follow this planter and you're going to follow it right in and you're going to hook up. No different than the military does on their bombers in flight refilling. We have the ability here to carry 300 gallon, and now we're going to keep the weight off the center of the planter. And you can see here in that short distance, we gave him a good stretch of nitrogen. And so now we have ourselves in a position where we can keep that planter always running at peak. And the data in the study that we've done, and I can't wait to show you this session in depth, there's over a 30% savings. So when you and I for years have said, well, we either need a bigger planter if we're going to plant all of our crop in that 7-day window, or we're going to have to go invest a lot of money in a high-speed planter, all of a sudden now we have technology that can make a difference. Notice that we have it designed where these wheels of the gator are running right in the wing wheel. And we're going to show you the penetrometer compaction where the gator of 300 gallon really has little to no effect on compaction in the field. And the tire of the planter itself sets in the lobe. By us hooking in right here, so when this planter turns around, he's going to come back in this track. And that's the way it's designed. The boom has got some nice technology. We have some very powerful electric magnets. And so I'm able just to reach up on my gator rop there, and I can flip a switch. Once I feed 12 volts to that, I come in and engage in here into the funnel, and I'm hooked, and I'm locked. And so then I'm able to just go ahead, and you can see here, I can start the pump, and now I'm transferring liquid, and it's going to go right up the wishbone and right up into the 700-gallon tanks themselves. And so the gator is basically a package where you remove your gator bed, all this extra axle, the frame, the stainless tank, the pump underneath, all the hosing is going to be a kit that slides right on, and then you're going to be off to the races. We designed it for a two-man team. Realize your nurse truck driver is going to bring the pickup and the 2,000-gallon, 1,000-gallon tank to the field. You're going to pull the gator behind the planter to the field. The guy that's usually sitting in the ditch bank listening to the country western music while you're planting, and they never usually have the hose out anyway. I've always marveled about that. They see the planter coming up the fill and they're still in the truck. But now you're going to do what? That guy's going to drive the gator. And he's going to have time. He's got almost 17 minutes between fills. The planter's going to stay extremely light. I've watched the center of these planters. It drives me nuts. We've seen a 10 to 12 bushel yield drag in the center of the planter. And so this gives us the ability to come, keep this planter running, keep them very light, and we can maximize. In 1,000 acres of corn, we're going to plant 300 extra acres in the exact same amount of time. So, thank you. Stay tuned to the 360 Proving Grounds channel, and we'll give you a lot more detail and a lot more close-up.